Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Harley Takes a Bride. Chapter 1. Harley Cohen leaned back on his elbows against the long, glossy bar. He was spending his Saturday night in the usual place, at the local saloon. He'd played poker with some cowboys and enjoyed his fair share of booze. He was getting bored now, however. Not enough action to suit his taste. His eye caught sight of a woman moving into his view, and he turned his attention to her. She was new, bright, red hair was piled atop her head. She wore an emerald green gown that showed off her legs and a matching green feather was tucked in her hair. Well. He needed to check this out, he thought, cocking his black cowboy hat over his dark brown eyes. He couldn't let a new girl slip into town and not find out more about her. He took it as a personal challenge to make every female around him become a Harley Cohen fan. He guessed his father had felt like that, too. Maybe that's why he took off as soon as he found out Harley's mother was pregnant. He sure didn't want to make a commitment to one woman. Harley knew the feeling. "Hey, pretty lady. I haven't seen you here before." Harley gave her his trademark heart-melting grin as he sidled up to where she stood by the piano. "Buy you a drink? I'd be mighty disappointed if you didn't." She ran her hand down the length of his muscular arm. "I'm Penny." "What's your name, cowboy?" "Just call me Harley, ma'am." "The infamous Harley Cohen?" She narrowed her green eyes and looked at him, a mischievous grin lighting her face. "You've heard of me? Let's just say your reputation precedes you, big boy." She chuckled and winked at him. "Want to get a table?" Harley grinned and moved toward the closest empty table. It seemed things were about to get a bit more interesting. They sat down and Mac, the bartender, brought them each over a drink. Harley took a long sip, then set his mug down on the table. "So, tell me, Harley, is it true that you shot your initials in the saloon sign?" she asked. It seemed the thing to do at the time, he answered with a shrug. They were both laughing when a giant of a man came slamming through the swinging doors and stared right at Harley. Oh, this looked like trouble. "Harley Cohen, you are a dead man," the giant bellowed and raged forward. "You've been messing with my wife, and I'm gonna put a stop to it here and now." Harley leapt to his feet just in time to meet the other man's meaty fist head-on with his nose. Harley shook his head and sprang into a fighter's crouch and took a swing at the man's jutting jaw. "You snake in the grass," the man hollered and picked up a chair and swiped it at Harley. Other men in the bar gathered round and joined in with gusto. A beer mug whizzed past Harley's ear, and he heard a table crack behind him. Penny screamed and ducked behind the bar, and Harley charged the man who had started the whole brawl. The sound of the front window shattering rang out over the thuds and booms filling the room. Harley swooped down and grabbed a table leg, slamming it into the big man's body like a battering ram. The man fell back on his behind and let out an "oof." The sound of a gunshot blasted through the air and all activity froze. Harley peered around the table leg he still clutched and saw Sheriff Buck Henry standing there, pistol pointed toward the ceiling, a large deputy by his side. "All right, you ignoramuses, get yourselves calmed down. I understand this here fight started between Bert Weber and Harley Cohen. Now, you all know our jail ain't big enough to hold all of ya, so I need the rest of you to keep it down to a dull roar. Harley and Bert, get your rears over here." Buck scowled and continued shouting orders, never doubting they would be obeyed. He shook his head, a look of disgust passing over his face. "Harley, I'm about sick of locking you up. You need to grow up, straighten up, and keep your hands to yourself. You're going to spend the night in jail and sober up. And Bert, I know you probably got burned by Harley and your old lady. But that don't mean you can come in here and start a war, dadbun it. You're going to jail, too. Well, heck, Henry, what would you do if he was cuckolding you with your old lady? I'd get rid of the lady, Henry replied drolly. Dadgum, he was tired. He'd known both these fellows for years and was sick of dealing with their scraps and shenanigans, especially Harley. Bert was a big, dumb ox and always would be, but Harley was a different story. Henry had been friends with Harley's mother and the uncle who'd raised him for years. The boy was bright and basically good-hearted, but dang, he was trouble. Always drinking, womanizing, and brawling. Well, let's get on with it. Head on over to the jail, you two. Harley, I was already planning on going out to your place for a game of chess with your uncle, so I'll let them know you won't be home tonight. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It was nearing noon when Harley rode his horse back toward the ranch. His head thumped with every clomp of the horse's hooves, and the sun glaring in his eyes didn't help. He dreaded getting home, dreaded the confrontation he knew he was in for with Uncle Frank. His real dad may have disappeared before he was born, but Frank Cohen was a good substitute. He'd helped raise Harley and was a gentle soul who ruled with an iron fist. Frank was close to God and wished Harley would create a relationship with him as well, but Harley couldn't see living his life by somebody else's rules. He didn't like being told what to do. He pretty much put up with it from Frank. His uncle had always been good to him and took good care of Harley's mother as well. He had to admit he loved the old man and hated it when he upset him, but he couldn't seem to help himself. Trouble just followed him. Mama worried about him, too. She was a beautiful, devout woman who'd been a great mother to him all his life. She'd been hinting pretty strongly about wanting grandkids lately, though. Heck, he was only 26. There was plenty of time ahead for that. He sure could use a cup of that good coffee she always had on the stove about now, though. Maybe that would calm down the tom-toms playing in his head. Anyway, that and a little snooze would put him back on track. Black Magic, his big, black stallion, increased his speed as he neared the ranch, sensing food ahead. Harley went directly to the barn and unsaddled his horse, hoping he wouldn't run into Frank anytime soon. It was about lunchtime, though, and if he wasn't way out in the fields, Frank usually came into the house for lunch. Maybe if Harley moved fast enough, he wouldn't run into his uncle. Luck wasn't with him, though. As soon as he walked into the spacious kitchen, he spotted Uncle Frank sitting at the table, a plate of beans in front of him. His mother was there, too, but he focused on his uncle and the hard stare he was delivering. Harley tried to play it cool and gave Uncle Frank a grin and kissed his mother on the cheek. Howdy, everybody. Everything going all right? Yeah, Frank answered him. Everything's just dandy, except that my nephew's a dunderhead who can't stay sober and spends most of his time in the hoosegow. I'm sorry, Uncle Frank, but he started it. No, he didn't. You started it when you started messing with his wife. You knew the woman was married. I'm not the only one she plays around with, Harley muttered as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Always some excuse, isn't there, boy? Well, I'll tell you what. All boys have to grow up eventually, and your time is now. I'm telling you, you're gonna shape up or get out, Harley. I've had it. Frank rose to his feet and pointed a finger in Harley's chest. You know I'm planning on leaving you this ranch. But that ain't happening if you don't straighten up. You will find a woman to marry in the next 3 months and settle down, or you can kiss this place goodbye and leave. And I mean out, off this ranch and on your own. All on your own. Got it? Maria's sharp gasp broke through the silence following Frank's proclamation. I'm sorry, Maria, but I've had it. If he doesn't prove himself in 3 months, he's done. With those words, Frank crammed his hat on his head and stomped out the door, slamming it behind him. Chapter 2. Alina Chambers rubbed her fists against her eyes, trying vainly to stop the tears flowing down her face. She knelt on the grass by Samuel's grave, mourning her husband and the father of her children. He'd been gone a few months now and Alina was growing desperate. She had 2 small children, Seth, who was 6, and 2-year-old Amber, and she didn't know how she was going to support them. She'd known Sam for most of her life. They grew up next door to each other in the shantytowns of Boston. It was unusual for kids to live in the same neighborhood for years, but somehow, their parents managed to stay in one house. Both their fathers worked on the docks. They both lost their mothers at an early age and were both only children. When Alina's dad died when she was 17, Sam stepped up and offered to marry her. She'd loved Sam forever, it seemed like, so it was only natural to say yes when he proposed. She'd always known they would end up together for the rest of their lives. Only trouble was, his life wasn't long enough. Sam had never been healthy, suffering from asthma and other maladies all his life, but he never let it get him down. He wasn't able to work the docks, so he got a job clerking in a store. Alina got pregnant right away and couldn't really work. They were poor, but happy. Then Sam got pneumonia. He couldn't work and suffered for weeks, growing paler and thinner. His cough was deep and racking, and his appetite disappeared. Watching him fade away, nursing him, and taking care of Seth and Amber wore Alina down. Now, Sam was gone and she was alone with the kids. She'd managed to get a few customers to let her do their laundry. Other than that, there was no income coming in. Disaster loomed like a thunderhead about to burst. She tried to find work, but couldn't. She didn't have much of a skill set, and she had 2 kids on her apron strings to boot. Who would watch them while she worked? Mrs. Murphy in the next apartment was watching the kids long enough for Alina to run out to the store and to stop by the graveyard. That couldn't happen on a full-time basis, though. Mrs. Murphy had 6 children of her own. Tears shook her frame so hard she couldn't stop shaking. She closed her blue eyes and prayed. God, please, help me care for these babies. Give me a sign that there is hope. If something doesn't happen soon, I will crack and go out of my mind, unable to care for myself or my children. She finally managed to stop sobbing and pulled herself together and headed for home. Her feet dragged along the dirty streets, and she swept a hanky across her nose. She was still sniffing when she saw it. It was a nondescript building with a cardboard sign in the window. All it said was, "Mail order brides wanted. Apply within." Of course, it was a crazy idea. She'd never been outside the city limits of Boston and she'd have to take the kids across the country with her. She wouldn't know a soul out west, and who knew what kind of man she'd end up with. He could be a brute who would beat her and the children, work them like servants, or make their lives miserable in general. She'd heard plenty of stories about mail-order brides. Plenty. Yet, many of them were good. And she'd asked God for a sign, and there, literally, was a sign offering her a way out of this mess she was in. Could she do it? Was she brave enough? Then she heard a verse from Isaiah loud and clear in her mind. So do not fear, for I am with you, do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. It wouldn't hurt to at least go inside. It might not turn out to be right for her, but it might be an opportunity heaven sent. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Harley ran a comb through his chestnut-colored curls and eyed himself in the mirror over his dresser. He saw a man who hadn't had a drink in 2 weeks and was ready for a night on the town. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but he wasn't waiting any longer. He'd worked hard, he'd stayed home, and he was done. He was calling a halt to good behavior, at least temporarily. Time to kick up his heels a bit. He gave the rolled-up sleeves of his blue shirt a final adjustment, then headed downstairs. Maria was in the yard pulling weeds in the freshly planted garden, and he felt a bit of guilt for leaving. But, darn it, all work and no play made Harley a dull boy. He'd help more tomorrow. You leaving now, Harley? Maria asked, looking up at him from beneath her sunbonnet. Worry lines creased her forehead as she took in the sight of her handsome, reckless son. She did love the boy, but he was going to make her old before her time. Be careful and try not to get in any trouble. You know Uncle Frank is about fed up. He was serious about you settling down. She rose to her feet and wiped her hands on her apron. I know, Mama, I know. I won't get in trouble, I promise. You know, Harley, there's plenty of single women in town. I could ask around, talk to some of the mothers. No, Mama, please don't do that. I don't need any help in that area, thank you. Believe me, I know all of them. I'll figure something out, trust me. He dropped a kiss on her cheek. Don't worry. With that, he strode to the barn and mounted Black Magic and headed into town. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Harley leaned against the bar and took another swig of beer. The saloon was busy, as usual on a Saturday, but Harley wasn't finding much to interest him. He felt restless. He didn't feel like playing poker, and Penny wasn't anywhere around. He perked up a bit when a bunch of fellows came in celebrating one guy's upcoming wedding. His ears perked up when he heard them congratulating him on his mail-order bride. Heck, Davy, you're a brave man, taking on a woman you ain't never met before. Calvin Parks slapped Davy on the back. What if she turns out to be a hellion? I'll take my chances if she looks half as good as the photograph she sent. She looks like an angel. He rubbed his chin as he thought about it. Besides, there ain't that many women willing to live out on the mountain in the woods. And it sure will be nice to have somebody cooking my meals and warming my bed this winter. Yep, I figure it was my lucky day when I found that marriage agency over at Miller's Mercantile. Harley hadn't thought about it, but that might be an idea. A mail-order bride could be risky, but, heck, he wouldn't have any emotional involvement in that kind of marriage. He'd heard of other fellas who'd got them a bride through the mail and it had worked out all right. It wouldn't be somebody he'd known for years and who knew about his indiscretions. And maybe he could set some ground rules in that type of marriage. Like no emotional ties, no tying him down period. It would satisfy Uncle Frank and Harley could stay on the land he loved. Making up his mind, Harley chugged the rest of his beer and headed out the swinging doors. Next stop, Miller's Mercantile. Chapter 3. Alina ran a hand across her forehead, shoving strands of ash blonde hair off her face. She was up to her elbows in suds, anxious to finish this load of wash before the kids woke up. They had been up late last night because the downstairs neighbors had been fighting and bellowing until after midnight, so hopefully Seth and Amber would both sleep in this morning. She would have loved to sleep longer herself, but it was impossible. Worry ate at her day and night. All there was for breakfast for the kids was toast made from stale bread and water. She had enough beef to make some stew for supper, but other than that, the food was just about gone. She had hoped she would have heard something about the mail-order bride application by now. It had been almost 2 months and not a word. It wasn't something she really wanted to do, but there seemed to be few other options. Nothing had changed or improved during that time. She lifted a pair of heavy coveralls from the washtub and moved them into the rinse pot. Her hands stung as she plunged them into the hot water. She hated the way her dry, cracked skin looked, but that was part of the price to pay for being a washerwoman. There certainly wasn't money for luxuries like hand lotion. Alina jerked as the sound of a knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, but it could just be a neighbor. She dried her hands on a kitchen towel and moved to see who had come calling. She opened the door to see a delivery boy standing there with a telegram in his hand. Surprised, Alina signed for it and shut the door, clutching the wire in her hands. She'd never gotten a telegram before. What could it be? With shaking fingers she ripped it open and read it. Goodness. Someone wanted her to be his bride. Didn't even want to correspond for a spell first. He must be in some kind of a rush or something. It was a 26-year-old rancher in Pine Ridge, Colorado. And she'd have to be ready to go within 3 days. Her stomach did a flip-flop. This was it. She would be changing her entire life. Moving from the city to the west, marrying a complete stranger. She'd be taking her children into the wilderness. There was no other choice, though. She couldn't stay here and let them starve to death because she couldn't find adequate work. She drew in a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She was moving to Pine Ridge, Colorado. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Alina sagged tiredly in the train seat. Amber, now that their trip was almost over, had finally collapsed into a deep sleep against her mother's breast. Drool ran down her chin and soaked Alina's blue suit jacket, but she was afraid to move because Amber had been fussy for the entire trip. She sure didn't want to wake her up. This was the first time she'd slept well during their journey, and most of the time when she hadn't been sleeping, she'd been fussing. Seth hadn't helped. He was hyped up about moving out west and could hardly contain his excitement. He ran and up down the aisle, shouting and asking questions one after another. She was glad he was enthusiastic but wished he could be a little less vocal about it. Now their journey was nearing an end, and the train would soon be pulling into Pine Ridge. Seth had grown more sober as he realized they were nearing their destination and had finally planted himself in the seat and was staring out the window, his blue eyes wide as he took in the sights. Alina closed her eyes for just a moment as the train covered the last few miles to Pine Ridge. She was exhausted. She had wanted a couple of minutes to clean up before pulling into the station and meeting her future husband, but that was obviously not in the cards. She knew she looked haggard, with drool staining her jacket, circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, and pins slipping from her thick mass of blonde curls. The kids were rumpled, too. Seth's shirt tail dragged over his breeches and Amber's face was sticky from the peppermint stick she'd had earlier. Seth had fallen a few minutes ago and there was a hole in the knee of his pants now. Amber's blonde curls needed brushing and her shoes were untied. Alina's stomach churned, both with hunger and anxiety. She was about to meet the man who would become her husband. So much depended on what type of man he was. She hoped he would be kind and responsible. She didn't much care what he looked like, as long as he was clean. She'd soon know. She saw the conductor headed their way, and he was hollering out the name of their stop. "We're here, Seth. Get ready to get off the train." Her voice sounded strained to her ears. She tried not to be nervous, but she couldn't help it. She just hoped the kids couldn't tell how stressed she was. Amber stirred and fussed as Alina gathered up her belongings. She'd kept a carpet bag and her reticule with her, the rest of the luggage was in the baggage car. They didn't have much. The kids had been growing so fast that there weren't many clothes left that fit them. She had brought some books and a few sentimental items, but it still only took up one trunk. As the train slowed, Alina's heart pumped faster. Her chest felt tight and a wave of dizziness washed over her as she stood still, watching the town come into view as they rolled into the station. She could see people milling about but hadn't spotted anyone she thought could be Harley yet. Amber refused to walk and clung to Alina's neck as they climbed down from the train. Seth was jumping up and down, and Amber was crying hysterically. Alina tried to comfort her and control Seth as she studied the people in the area. There was an old man who welcomed a little old lady clad all in black, a young couple who greeted an older couple lovingly, and a drummer headed for a nearby hotel, his drum hitting against his legs as he walked. But no young man who seemed to be looking for her. She didn't know what to do next. She tried to control the panic welling within her but had to blink back brimming tears. She was tired, confused, and scared, and the kids were wearing on her nerves. Now, Harley was nowhere to be found. She spotted a middle-aged woman who looked friendly, but when Alina approached her and asked if she knew Harley Cohen, the woman said, "Harley Cohen," in a horrified voice, sniffed audibly, and marched away. Well, goodness, what was that about? Alina's shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in Amber's curls. She didn't have any money to buy return tickets or pay for a hotel room. They were stranded here in a strange place with no place to go. Nausea rose in her belly, and she felt like screaming with frustration. That's when she heard a man speaking to her and looked up to see a tall, beefy man with a bushy gray mustache and a star on his chest. "Morning, ma'am. I'm Sheriff Henry. You look a bit troubled. Is there anything I can do to help? Someone was supposed to meet us, but I don't think he's here." "I don't know what to do," she explained in a worried voice. "Do you know Harley Cohen?" "Harley? I surely do. Are you a friend of the Cohens?" Alina felt a little awkward explaining but plunged ahead. "Actually, I'm Harley's mail-order bride." "Well, what do you know?" He hasn't said a word about that. The sheriff scratched his head and smiled. Well, Harley must have gotten held up. Tell you what, why don't I get a wagon and take you on out to the ranch? Would you? That would be so kind. Thank you. She felt relief rush through her. Not a problem. Why don't you and the kids have a seat on the bench over there, and I'll be back in a few and pick you up. Won't take long at all. Buck didn't want to miss seeing the look on Maria's and Frank's faces when he told them who she was. Chapter 4. Maria looked over the clothesline where she was hanging the laundry when she heard the sounds of an approaching wagon. She recognized Buck at the reins but had no clue who the woman and children were with him. She dropped the last shirt into the basket and ran her hands down her skirt and patted her hair into place, then went forward to meet the company. Howdy, Buck. What brings you out our way? Hi, Maria. I brought you some special guests. This is Alina Chambers and her kids, Seth and Amber. She's Harley's mail-order bride. Maria couldn't help it. Her mouth fell open in shock. Are you sure? He hasn't said a word about it. Here's my letter, ma'am. Alina dug into her reticule and pulled out a wrinkled letter and handed it over. Maria scanned it carefully and then a wide smile spread across her face. Welcome, Alina. I'm just surprised he actually sent for someone. I'm Maria, Harley's mother. Won't you come in? You, too, Buck. I'd love to, Maria, but I've got to get back to town. I hope you like it here, Alina. He helped them out of the wagon and rode off. Maria ushered them across the front porch of the cabin, and they entered a spacious front room with a wide staircase running up a side wall. A big, stone fireplace was the focal point of another wall, and sturdy leather sofas and chairs were scattered around the room. Come on in the kitchen, and let me get you something to eat. I know you're probably famished. Maria led the way through the dining room into a kitchen with a big round table in the center of it. Alina couldn't help but be impressed. Her entire apartment would have fit in this kitchen alone. Now you just sit down at the table. You kids want some cookies? Alina was grateful to have arrived at the end of their journey, but her nerves still weren't settled. Where was Harley? You would think he'd be eager to meet her and the children. Maria set a platter of cookies on the table and poured them each a glass of milk. Seth dug in eagerly, and even Amber quieted down and stuffed her mouth full of an oatmeal cookie. Her big blue eyes still held a frightened look in them, and she was still sniffling. Hopefully, she would settle down now. You eat all you want. How about a ham sandwich, too? Maria bustled around the kitchen, getting out the bread and slicing the ham, with a broad smile on her face. I'm so glad you have children, Alina. It's been too long since we heard the patter of little feet around this place. I'm afraid you'll hear more than that, Maria, Alina said as Seth reached for his cup and spilled his milk. My kids aren't exactly little angels. Oh, don't you worry about that, child. All children are angels with a little devil in them. Alina chuckled. Maria was right about that. Soon their bellies were full, and Amber's eyes were drooping with fatigue. Unfortunately, Seth was just the opposite, and the food seemed to revive his energy level back to full force. He hopped off his chair and began to run around the room singing at the top of his lungs. Seth, please be quiet. I can't hear myself think. You need something to do, don't you, young man? Come on, I've got something special to show you. Maria took his hand and led him to the living room. Look here, look at all these little animals Harley has whittled. Do you want to play with them? Yes, ma'am, Seth answered enthusiastically. Can I take them out on the porch? Sure you can. Just don't leave the porch, okay? Soon Seth was settled down playing with the animals, and Amber was winding up to full wail. Once again, Maria came to the rescue. Poor little thing is exhausted. Why don't you take her in my room and try to get her to lie down for a bit? There's a rocking chair in there you can put to use. My room is just off the dining room. While you do that, I'll go get Harley. *****. Alina carried Amber into the bedroom, and Maria took off on her mission. The older woman waited until Alina was out of sight, then scurried up the stairs. That darn Harley had been out drinking again last night and was still in bed. She burst into his room and yanked the covers off him. "Get yourself out of that bed, boy. Your mail-order bride is here. Buck Henry brought her out since you didn't bother to meet her train." Harley groaned and rolled over. What was his mother saying? Something about a train. Holy cow, he was supposed to go pick up his woman today. Now she was here? Ma, I forgot all about her. Can't you entertain her for a little while I sleep some more? I will not. You get your hiney up and clean up. You brought Alina all the way out here, and you're going to come and meet her right now. I didn't raise you to be so rude. Okay, he grumbled as he got up. Say, what's she look like? She's pretty as a picture. Way too good for somebody who looks like he's been wallowing in the bottom of a whiskey barrel all night. I can't believe you never even told me you sent for a mail-order bride. Well, it seemed like the thing to do at the time, he said. I needed to get Uncle Frank off my back and this seemed like it would work. I just hope you don't break that girl's heart while you're saving your own hide. Now hurry up and get downstairs. She shook her finger at him and stomped out of the room. That boy was going to be the death of her yet. Harley poured water from the pitcher into the washbowl and tried to rid himself of the smell of sour whiskey and dragged a razor across his face. When he was finished, he pulled on jeans and a shirt, then ran a comb through his shaggy dark hair. That was good as it was going to get, he guessed. Might as well go face the music. The first thing he saw when he walked into the kitchen was a blonde-headed woman with her back to him. Well, she looked good from that angle anyway. Golden curls were arranged on top of her head, one strand dangling down along her neck. Her blue traveling suit was rumpled but showed off her curvaceous figure nicely as she placed dishes in the sink. Now if only the front of her looked as good as the back. Alina turned just then and he got his first look at her face. Holy cow, she was beautiful. Long, thick lashes surrounded eyes of crystal blue. Her skin was creamy white perfection with a blush of rose along high cheekbones, and full, lush lips formed a perfect Cupid's bow. She startled as she caught sight of him, her hand flying to her melon-shaped breasts. Oh, I didn't hear you come in. You must be Alina. I'm Harley. It is a pleasure to meet you. She smiled, a dimple flashing in her right cheek. How do you do, Harley? You're right, I'm your mail-order bride, Alina. I wasn't expecting someone who looks like you. I mean, someone so pretty and all. Harley was stunned by her beauty. Maybe this mail-order bride idea wasn't such a bad idea after all. Pink stained her cheeks, and she lowered her lashes for a moment. She clearly didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. I'm sorry I wasn't there to meet the train this morning, he said. I got held up. He couldn't think of an excuse fast enough, so he left it at that. How was your trip? You came all the way from Boston, right? Yes. It was long and exhausting, but I'm here now. Alina seemed about to say something else when a little boy came careening into the room. Mama, I saw a dog outside. He was hopping with excitement, his blonde curls bouncing on his head. Seth, calm down and come and meet Mr. Cohen. Harley, this is my son, Seth. Her son? Harley was flabbergasted. He didn't remember any mention of children when he agreed to take her. Of course, he had said he didn't have any special requirements, but he sure hadn't agreed to take on children as well as a bride. Maria came into the room and smiled at Alina. So, I see you've met Harley. How are you two getting along? Alina was about to answer when a wail came floating through the air. Alina's head turned toward the noise and she excused herself, hurrying from the room. Maria eyed her son and could tell by the look on his face that he had been completely unaware of Alina's children. She couldn't help but grin a little bit as she informed Harley that Alina not only had Seth, but she was also the mother of a 2-year-old daughter. Harley felt like he'd been kicked in the gut. Heck, He was hardly fit to be a husband, let alone a father. Dang, what had he gotten himself into? Chapter 5. Frank Cohen was astonished when Maria told him the news. A mail-order bride? Really? That Harley was full of surprises. He couldn't believe the boy had actually sent away for a woman, especially one with 2 little children. He found it hard to believe that his nephew was going to marry a complete stranger. He was the motivating force behind Harley's decision, he knew. He'd forced Harley into a corner, and this was the result. Well, maybe it would work out. He could only pray that it would. That evening, they all came to the table for dinner. Frank was amazed by how pretty the woman was and could hardly take his eyes off the kids. The little girl was a miniature of her mother, and Seth was a sturdy young boy who seemed to have all the makings of a good cowboy. Wonder why Harley seemed so quiet. He barely spoke and seemed almost backward around the kids, not talking to them at all. Alina was quiet as well. Only Seth seemed to act naturally, chattering on about all he'd seen this afternoon. "You're going to like it here, aren't you, Seth?" Frank said. "You like animals and being outside. One day soon, Harley will teach you to ride your very own pony." "My own pony?" Seth gasped. "Oh, wow, Mama, did you hear that?" "I sure did, Seth." Alina reached over and wiped sweet potatoes off Amber's mouth as she answered her son. "You are a lucky young man. Now, eat your peas." My own pony," Seth chanted, banging his spoon against his plate. Harley winced at the noise, the clanging piercing right through his skull. Amber joined in the cacophony by adding a soprano wail to the noise as her mother tried to clean her hands. It was all too much. Harley threw his napkin down and stood up. "I've got a meeting in town to go to," he announced. "I'll see you all in the morning." Alina stared after him open-mouthed. He couldn't even spend the first evening with her. A pang shot through her heart. Was he displeased with her? Did he find her unattractive? But hadn't he told her she was pretty? For someone who was in such a rush to have her come west in the first place, this seemed more than odd. She sucked in a deep breath. Maybe coming to Pine Ridge hadn't been such a good idea after all. Asterisk. Harley sagged in the saddle as his horse trotted toward home. The sun was just beginning to creep over the eastern horizon while early birds filled the air with song. Darn birds, he thought. His head hurt bad enough that even those light sounds seemed like hammers pounding in it. He'd had a rough night. He drank too much, of course, and had a fight with a big cowboy with a heck of a punch. Harley rubbed his jaw to ease the ache in it. Now he wanted to get home and get cleaned up without running into either his mother or his uncle. He wasn't in the mood to listen to Frank's mouth today. He wasn't that lucky, of course. Frank was in the barn tending to a sick mare when Harley made it there to put magic away. His uncle turned a stony face toward him and glared. "You just getting in, boy? I thought you had more sense than that. Your bride was here all by herself on her first night in Colorado. She survived, didn't she?" Harley snapped back as he pulled the saddle off his horse and began to rub him down. "I'm not here to babysit her or those 2 kids of hers. Heck, I didn't even know she had kids." "Well, she does, so now they're your responsibility. I feel sorry for them." "Oh, leave me be, old man. I don't feel like arguing with you. I'll see you later." Harley stomped toward the house to get cleaned up before he ran into Maria, too. The way his luck was going, he'd probably bump right into her. Fortunately for him, he didn't see his mother until after he'd washed and shaved. When he came downstairs, everybody was already seated at the table. Alina looked up and gave him a small smile. Man, she sure was a good-looking addition to their meals. She looked as sweet as the muffins sitting on a plate in the middle of the table. The tension between Harley and Frank was so thick, you could almost cut it with a knife. They didn't speak to each other, barely looked at each other. Alina could feel it, could see it. She couldn't help wondering if she were the cause of the problem. When they were finished eating, Alina took the children into the kitchen to clean them up. Harley went upstairs to get the hat he'd forgotten. When he came back down, he paused on the stairs as he listened to Frank and Maria arguing in the dining room while Maria cleared the table. "I've had it with him, Maria. Here he's dragged that young woman all the way out here, and he's still pulling these stunts. He smelled like a brewery when he came dragging in at the crack of dawn this morning. He's building up false hopes in that poor girl, and it makes me sick." "Well, you're the one who told him he had to get married. He's just doing what you insisted on. I swear you two are going to send me to an early grave." "I'm sorry, Maria, but he's turning out to be rotten to the core. Always drinking and fighting, carousing with saloon girls. I hate to say it, but he's just like his pa, good for nothing." Frank threw out the words and stomped out of the house. Harley felt like Frank had punched him right in the gut. He wasn't like his father. Was he? Lord knew that was the last thing he wanted. He'd never even seen the man and hated his guts for what he'd done to his mother. But he had to admit it. Frank had a point. What was he doing with his life? Blowing it, that's what. He slapped his hat on his head and followed Frank out the door. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Alina sat in the rocking chair on the front porch of the cabin and breathed deeply of the sweet mountain air. The stars were peeking out and a gentle breeze caressed her cheek. It was beautiful here. Alina didn't know what to do. Harley was a good-looking man, but he didn't want her or her children, that much was obvious. He hadn't spent any time with her or the kids. She had no way to leave, no place to go. All she could do was try to make the best of it. She decided she would try to help around the ranch as much as possible. Maybe that would make Harley think better of her. She'd cook and clean, and of course, take care of the kids. What else could she do? She had to think of the children first. If this didn't work, she'd have to figure something else out. She hated the thought of leaving again. She'd only been here a week and already fallen under the spell of the place. It was so much cleaner than Boston. No trash cluttered the streets, no neighbors fighting through the night. It smelled so much better here, too. Fresh and clean. She could walk outside and not see another person or a house in any direction, just trees and hills. Seth seemed to be settling in fine. He'd made friends with the dog and discovered a cat with a litter of kittens in the barn. He ran all over the yard and climbed trees as high as he could go. Even Amber seemed happier here. How could she drag them away to another strange place? She rocked gently and closed her eyes, fear eating at her nerves. She was afraid of the future, had no clue what it held. What if she were forced to leave because Harley changed his mind about marrying her? She should have never put so much faith in a man she'd never met. She wouldn't have been in any better condition if she'd stayed in Boston, though. The money was nearly gone, and she didn't even know how she would have paid next month's rent. At least, they had a roof over their heads here. A single tear slid silently down her cheek as a knot grew in her stomach. Maria and Frank were kind to her and the kids, but she felt terribly alone. No friends, no familiar faces. Even the vegetation here was different, filled with quaking aspen trees and mountains covered in forests. It seemed everyone traveled by horse, and she didn't even know how to ride. The sound of footsteps broke into her thoughts and she quickly blinked and ran a hand over her cheek to wipe away the tear. She looked up to see Harley nearing the porch, his boots crunching across the path. "Evening, Alina. Enjoying the weather?" "Yes, it's beautiful out here. It's so different than Boston. I can't imagine living in a big city. I think I'd feel boxed in." Harley took a seat in the rocker next to her, and she felt her heartbeat quicken. He was so handsome and being this close to him made her feel weak. What would it be like to be married to him? She wondered. To feel his hands on her. A shiver ran down her back as the thought crossed her mind. "Alina, I'm sorry I haven't spent more time with you. I know this is hard for you, but I hope you understand, it's hard for me, too. I hadn't planned on getting married for some time yet, but I suddenly found myself in need of a wife. It wasn't a position I planned on being in, you know?" She nodded, unsure where he was going with this line of conversation. "I'm going to try harder to be a better man. I promise. Why don't we start by going into town on Saturday night? There's a dance we could go to after we have dinner. What do you say?" Alina couldn't hide her excitement. "That sounds lovely, Harley. I'd like that. But what about the children? I'm sure my mother would be more than happy to keep an eye on them." Alina thought Maria would probably do that, but she was still a little worried. Amber wasn't good about letting other people care for her, but they could try, at least. "I'd love to do that, Harley." "Great. It's a date then." He stood and strode to the porch railing. "The moon is coming up. It's full tonight." Alina joined him and looked up at the sky. It was clear and cloudless, and she thought she could see a million stars. She'd never seen anything like it in Boston. It felt like she could see forever. She put her hands on the railing and sighed. It was perfect. Harley suddenly laid a hand on top of hers. It was a big hand, roughened from work. She felt a current of excitement shoot straight up her arm when he touched her, his thumb rubbing across the back of her hand. She glanced shyly at him and saw he was gazing at her. Their eyes held for several minutes, then he sighed and said good night. Alina let herself back in the house and went to bed, thoughts churning through her mind. Maybe things would work out after all. All she could do was pray. Chapter 6. Alina checked her hair in the mirror one more time. Tonight was the night she and Harley were going to dinner, and her nerves were taut as well-tuned guitar strings. She had spent the day wondering what to wear even though she didn't have many choices. She finally decided on a pale blue dress and added a blue ribbon to her hair. This would be the first time she and Harley had spent any significant amount of time alone together. What would they talk about? Would they get along, or would there be awkward periods of stiff silence? She didn't know what to expect from this outing. Well, it was time to go downstairs and get going. Hopefully, all would go well. Harley was waiting in the living room and gave her a warm smile when she made her appearance. Her heart skipped a beat at the sight of him. His hair was glossy, and his eyes were warm and bright. She couldn't help but notice how well his trousers hugged his body and how broad his shoulders were. "You look lovely, Alina," he said, taking her hand in his. "I'll be proud to have you by my side this evening." "Thank you, Harley." Her cheeks turned pink beneath his inspection, her stomach doing a flip-flop at hearing his kind words. "Let me say goodbye to the children, and I'll be ready to go." She dropped a kiss on Seth's head and admonished him to be a good boy while she was gone. "You're coming back, right, Mama?" His little face showed lines of anxiety. He still remembered how his papa had gone away and never come back, and Alina rarely left the children for even a little while. "Of course I am, Seth." She stooped down and looked him straight in the eyes. "Don't ever doubt that I will always be here for you." Seth seemed satisfied with her answer and turned back to playing with his little carved animals. Amber, on the other hand, was clearly not going to be as easy to appease, her bottom lip sticking out in an angry pout, tears already forming in her eyes. "Don't cry, sissy. Mama will be back soon, and Grandma Maria and Uncle Frank will be with you while I'm gone." Her words were worthless in comforting the little girl who wrapped her arms around her mother's knees and let out a loud wail. Alina stroked her curls and felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Maybe she shouldn't go. "Now, don't worry about a thing, Alina. I'll take care of these babies." Maria swooped in and picked Amber up after prying her off her mother's skirts. "You go on and have a good time. You deserve it." "Thank you, Maria. I do appreciate you caring for the children." "Nonsense. You've been working hard around here, doing most of the cooking and a whole lot of the cleaning. Now's the time for fun." Alina still looked doubtful as she let Harley escort her out the front door. To her surprise, there was no buckboard waiting. Instead, a shiny black buggy stood in front of the porch. "Here we go, Alina," Harley said as he wrapped his hands around her waist and helped her up. He walked around to the other side of the buggy and climbed in, taking the reins in his large hands and turning the buggy up the long lane that led to the road. Next stop, Rosie's Cafe. Alina settled in and let her nerves calm. It was a beautiful evening, and she enjoyed the ride. This was the first actual look she had at the land that surrounded the ranch. She'd been too tense and exhausted to pay attention to it when Sheriff Henry had brought her to the Circle C, trees and pastures spread out on either side of the road, wildflowers blooming everywhere. The road wound up and down hills as it followed beside a meandering river, the sound of the water soothing to her ears. Harley asked her if she missed her life in Boston, and she shrugged. Not really. It was busy and noisy, not peaceful like it is here. I don't know if I could live in a city, he replied. I like wide, open countryside. I went to Kansas City once and couldn't wait to get back. So it's always this peaceful here? Well, it gets mighty cold in the winter, but that season has its beauty, too. Wait until you see these hills covered in snow. It gets cold in Boston, too, but there's not much pretty about it. It's white and perfect for a little bit, but before you know it, it's all sooty and slushy. That's not a problem in Colorado, I guarantee it. I hope you like beef steak. That's Rosie's specialty. Sounds lovely, she answered just as her stomach rumbled loudly. Well, according to that sound, we better hurry up and get you fed. He laughed as he said it, and Alina couldn't help but join him. It was only a few miles into town, and before she knew it, Harley was securing the buggy to a rail in front of a small cafe. When he came and helped her down, she burned where his hands touched her waist. It seemed like every time he touched her, her body reacted. Why did she feel so weak when she felt his hands on her? After they were seated at a small table, she was surprised and relieved when conversation continued to flow smoothly. Harley really was an interesting man. He told her tales about adventures on the trail and talked about his mother. He even talked about his love for horses and cattle. A number of people stopped by their table to greet Harley and to meet his guest. He seemed to be popular with the town folks, though many of them acted surprised to see him with her. When he announced she was his fiancée, Alina couldn't help but notice the shocked look in people's eyes. One man even said he was surprised to hear that Harley was getting married. You caught the biggest fish in the sea around here, ma'am, a man with a big nose and an even bigger belly exclaimed. You must be a magician. Harley actually blushed at the man's words. Alina didn't respond. She didn't want to hear about Harley's previous escapades, really she didn't. Harley ordered them both a slice of apple pie, and she enjoyed every bite of it. Then he told her he was ready to go to the barn dance at Jacob Harper's place, and she again felt a flare of excitement. She and Samuel used to love to dance, and now she was going to get to do it again. The barn was full of people when they arrived, and the music had already started. 3 men were pounding out tunes on 2 guitars and a fiddle, and she couldn't help tapping her toes to the rollicking tune. When Harley asked her if she wanted to dance, she eagerly accepted. Dancing with Harley was wonderful. He swung her around with grace, and she laughed from the pure joy of it. It felt so good to dance again, especially with Harley. He was so big and strong, and she felt happy for the first time since Samuel died. Maybe this really could work out. She didn't get to dance with Harley all evening, however. Several other men asked for the privilege as well, Sheriff Henry being one of them. I'm glad to see you looking so happy, Alina, he told her. It looks like you're enjoying Colorado. It's beautiful here, Sheriff, and the Cohens are wonderful people. I thought you'd like it. I hope you and Harley have a beautiful marriage. His words made her feel hopeful. Maybe they really would. Eventually, the dance was over and Harley and Alina climbed in the carriage to return to the ranch. Harley was in a good mood and sang one of the tunes the band had played while he drove the trotting horses along. She even felt good enough to sing along with him. When the song ended, they both laughed with pleasure. Spending time with Harley was turning out to be great fun. She smiled to herself as she began another tune. When they got home, Alina accompanied Harley while he put the horses up. She drew in a deep breath and took in the fragrance of hay and horses. She had to smile as she saw Harley take the time to give every horse in the barn an extra pat and spoke softly to each one. When he was finished, he took her hand and walked her to the porch. "Thank you, Alina. I really enjoyed this evening." "I did, too, Harley. Thank you for taking me." She turned her eyes to him, and he smiled down at her. They didn't speak for a moment, then his head lowered and he captured her lips beneath his. The kiss was tender and warm. He tasted wonderful, his arms pulled her close, and she melted against him. Her knees grew weak as the kiss deepened. How could she enjoy kissing him so much? She barely knew him. That question flitted through her mind, but she ignored it. She didn't want to think about anything but the pleasure she felt, the sensations singing through her. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him even closer. Magic. Harley pulled back, then dropped a couple more kisses on her hungry lips. "Good night, Alina. I'll see you in the morning." Alina drew in a shaky breath. She could barely speak, she was so filled with swirling emotions. She finally managed to whisper goodnight before turning and fleeing into the house. She ran up the stairs and sat down on her bed. Her legs could hardly support her. She knew she needed to check on the kids, but that would have to wait for a moment. She wanted to get herself back under control before she saw anyone. She was afraid it would be too obvious she had been kissing Harley. A few minutes later, she felt calm enough to peek in on the kids and found them both sleeping soundly. She hoped they hadn't given Maria too much trouble while she was gone. She knew her children could be a handful. She made her way back to her bedroom and changed into her nightgown and crawled in, but sleep was slow in coming. Her mind was filled with whirling thoughts, most of them about Harley. He was so good-looking, so manly. And his kisses were enchanting. He was much bigger than Samuel had been. Almost scary big. But she'd never seen him use his size in anger, never seen him hurt a living creature. But he wasn't Samuel. She still loved her first husband and missed him terribly. Should she really open her heart to another man? Would the kids ever accept him as their father? The troubling thoughts still roamed through her mind when she finally fell asleep. Chapter 7. Harley was having trouble falling asleep, too. He couldn't stop thinking about Alina's kisses. Man, they were sweet. He didn't remember ever enjoying a kiss more. And the way she felt in his arms. She was a perfect fit, soft and cuddly. He had to admit it. He was definitely drawn to her. Something about her made him want to be with her, to hold her and protect her. The thought of anyone hurting her sent angry sparks igniting in him. But if he was honest with himself, he knew he was the one who could hurt her the most. And he wasn't ready to fall in love. Love meant responsibility he wasn't ready for. Besides, Alina was a mother. She had 2 kids, and he didn't think he would make a good father. Sure, the kids were cute and all, but kids needed a man they could look up to. Not an irresponsible jerk who didn't want to take on caring for them and providing for all their needs. Heck, he didn't even know how to be a father. It's not like his own dad had ever been around to show him. Uncle Frank was a great substitute, though, he had to admit. He'd taught him to ride, to shoot, and how to take care of the ranch. He'd made sure he had food and clothes and been brought up to love God. But that wasn't the same as having a real father, was it? No, Alina was here to help him resolve a problem. She was here to help ensure his place here on the Circle C. He did love this ranch, and marrying Alina was apparently the only way he could hold on to it. But loving her wasn't in the cards. It wouldn't be good for him, and more importantly, it wouldn't be good for her or her children. So he needed to keep himself at a distance. He didn't need to get emotionally involved with that beautiful woman, no matter how much he wanted her physically. That's just the way it had to be for now. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Alina peeked in the oven at the cake she was baking. It needed a few more minutes of cooking time. That was just enough time for her to run a dust cloth over the living room furniture. She got a rag and headed to the big room, then paused in the doorway when she heard voices. It was Maria, telling a story to the kids. She moved behind the door frame and peeked around the corner. Both kids were on the sofa with Maria, one on each side. Amber leaned against her, her thumbs stuck in her mouth, and Seth was bouncing on the edge of his seat. Maria looked at the picture of happiness snuggling against the kids. It made Alina feel good to watch them as Seth reached out and patted Maria's cheek, smiling and showing off his missing front tooth. She was most amazed by Amber. Was this the same little girl who didn't want anything to do with anyone besides her mother? Now she cuddled with Maria, her big blue eyes growing sleepy as she curled into the older woman's side. Alina could hardly believe it. The dusting could wait. This moment was too precious to disrupt. Harley was stacking bales of hay in the barn as he contemplated his situation. Alina had been here a month now, and he still hadn't set a wedding date. He just didn't know if he should. Sure, Alina was beautiful, the kids were sweet, but was he ready? The picture of him being a married man just didn't look right to him. He heard footsteps behind him and looked up to see Frank coming into the barn. He looked tired, a little gray around the edges. Harley felt a moment of regret. He was pretty sure that some of the wrinkles lining his uncle's face were his fault. "I'm about done here, Uncle Frank. I'll go mend the fence in just a little bit." "That's okay, son. I've been wanting to talk to you anyway." He took off his hat and wiped his sweat-dampened brow. "I'm wondering if you're ever going to actually marry that gal. People are starting to talk, you know." "Talk? About what?" "About an unmarried woman living here with you, of course. I went into town yesterday and overheard two old biddies discussing it. I think it's time you manned up and married her." Harley didn't speak for a minute. He set the last bale on top of the pile, then turned to look at his uncle. "What's the rush, Uncle Frank? I thought we ought to wait a little bit, get to know each other better before we tie the knot." "What's wrong with that?" "Nothing, Harley, but you don't have all the time in the world, you know. You don't want to ruin her reputation, do you?" Harley grimaced. He knew Frank was right, but darn it, he didn't like being pushed into something he wasn't comfortable with. "You know I'm only in this situation 'cause of you, Frank. You're the one who insisted I get a woman and settle down." "I didn't just say settle down. I said get married. Just because Alina's here doesn't mean you've met your end of the bargain. Heck, you've hardly spent any time with her the last few weeks." Harley knew he was right. He had been avoiding Alina ever since they'd gone to dinner. She was too much of a temptation. But he had settled down. He wasn't drinking every night, he wasn't getting into fights. He wasn't even going into town very often. What more did the man want from him? "I've been busy. Spring's a busy season on a ranch." He gave the first excuse he could think of. "Don't rush me, okay? Well, spring's over, and summer's here. Before you know it, it will be winter, and I guess we'll still have a house guest instead of a wife on our hands." "Geez, Frank, give me a break. I've been behaving myself, in case you haven't noticed." "I've noticed, all right, and I'm glad for that. But you can't just keep her hanging on. She came out here to marry you, and that's what needs to happen." Harley turned his back and kicked at a pile of hay. "I'll get around to it. Just give me a little more time." "Okay, Harley, you win. I'll back off. But just remember, you're not the only one involved here. Alina deserves better than to be toyed with." "Don't you think so?" "Of course she does, Frank. Of course. But did she deserve to be saddled with a loser like him for the rest of her life?" That was the question eating at him. Alina was just finishing the breakfast dishes and bending over to put a skillet in the bottom cabinet when Harley joined her in the kitchen. "Come on, Alina. Get the kids and let's go for a ride." She straightened up and looked at him in surprise. She didn't know why, but Harley had definitely been avoiding her for the past couple of weeks. A ride? Really? She pushed a strand of hair out of her eyes. Where to? I thought we'd go out to the river. Maybe take a picnic lunch. I'd like to show Seth how to fish, too. Oh, he would love that. Just let me round up the kids and put something together for lunch. Then we can go. Alina could hardly contain her excitement. Not only was she going to get away from the ranch house for a while, but she was also going to spend the day with Harley. She felt like a kid who had been promised a trip to the candy store. She hurriedly packed up some leftover fried chicken, some young carrots, and a dozen or so cookies. She called the kids and made sure their faces were clean, then announced that they were ready. Where we going, Mama? Seth asked. Harley's going to take us to the river. He wants to teach you to catch a fish. She smiled with delight when her little boy shot his fist in the air and whooped with excitement. Harley grabbed the picnic basket and hurried them out the door. If Amber was a little bigger, we'd ride the horses there, but I guess the buckboard will have to suffice for today. Alina chuckled. That will be fine, especially since I don't know how to ride. He stopped and turned to stare at her. You don't know how to ride a horse? Nope. I never had the opportunity back in Boston. Well, that's something we're going to have to correct. Your first riding lesson is tomorrow. What about me, Harley? You said I could ride a pony. You, too, little man. You, too. Yeah. I love it here, Mama. Now I've got a dog and I'm going to learn to ride, too. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Alina sat on a rock at the edge of the river, her skirt hiked up to her knees and her bare feet dangling in the water. Amber lay napping on the blanket they'd brought with him, and Seth and Harley had gone for a hike in the woods. She leaned back on her arms and breathed in the sweet air, sunshine caressing her shoulders. This was a beautiful spot. The water felt refreshing, a gentle breeze kissed her cheek, and she could smell the surrounding pine trees. She thought she could sit here all day and not get bored. Harley and Seth had spent hours together today. Seth happily cast the line from his cane pole into the river time and again and had even managed to catch a few fish. He was so proud Alina thought he would burst with it. Now they were off traipsing through the woods together. It made Alina happy to think of the two of them getting close. Suddenly, she knew Harley was back. She could just feel him. It was like she was picking up on an unspoken message from him. She looked up and saw him standing there, his gaze fastened on her bare legs. Despite the warm temperature, she quickly pulled her skirts down and stood up. Hi, she greeted him shyly. Did you fellas have a good hike? It was the best, Mama, Seth hollered as he ran up and hugged her waist. I saw rabbits, and squirrels, and even a bear. Alina startled when she heard that. A bear? Oh, gracious, Harley. I didn't know there were bears around here. Oh, yeah, plenty of them. You just have to respect them and give them plenty of space, and they'll do the same for you. Yeah, Mama, it was this big. Seth held out his arms to show her. And it went like this. He growled and charged toward her, his feet landing on a round stick just before he got to her. He stumbled and fell and, quicker than she could move, he rolled down the hill and off the cliff, tumbling into the river below. Alina screamed and ran to the edge, peering over at her struggling son. Oh, dear Lord, he can't swim, she cried. I can't either. That didn't stop her from getting ready to leap in the coursing river. No, Alina, Harley hollered. Let me. He quickly pulled off his boots, threw his hat to the ground, and dove into the water. The current was swift and Seth was bobbing along, his head disappearing beneath the surface every few seconds. His arms flapped wildly, and she could see the panic on his face. Fear clogged her throat so thickly she couldn't even cry. Harley swam with strong strokes, fighting to catch up with the little boy. They both disappeared around the bend and Alina ran to keep them in sight, at the same time turning her head to keep an eye on Amber. Thank God, she was still sleeping. Alina's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. Prayers rolled from her lips. God, please don't let me lose my little boy. Save him. Please, God, save my boy. Chapter 8. Alina collapsed to her knees when she realized Harley had reached Seth and pulled him close. Deftly, he swam toward the river bank and managed to climb up the rocky bank, pulling Seth with him. Alina watched as Harley laid her son on the ground and began pressing repeatedly on his chest. Seth's eyes were closed, his cheeks pale. He didn't move or make a sound. Dear God, he was dead. Just as that thought passed through her terrified mind, Seth started to cough. River water came spewing out of his mouth, and Harley quickly rolled him on his side. Seth, baby, oh, God, Seth. Alina cried, rushing to them. She gathered him in her arms, tears rolling unchecked down her cheeks. She rocked him back and forth, brushing his wet curls off his forehead, not caring that his drenched body got her soaking wet as well. Thank you, Harley, thank you. Her words were eked out between sobs as she cast her grateful gaze on the big man who stood dripping beside her. You saved his life, Harley. Any man would have done the same, Alina. Now, we need to get home and dry. He needs to rest. She nodded and reluctantly let Harley take Seth from her and lay him in the back of the wagon. She gathered up Amber, who fussed at her nap being disturbed, and Harley picked up the blanket and laid it over Seth's shivering body before helping Alina and Amber into the wagon. Harley made quick work of the trip home, keeping the horses trotting briskly across the fields. He hollered for Maria as they pulled up in front of the house, and she came running. Seth was hustled inside and Alina changed his wet clothes for dry ones, tucking him into bed and pulling the covers over him. He was still pale and fell into a restless sleep. Alina stayed by his bedside the rest of the day while Maria took Amber in hand. She refused to leave him even to go eat supper. Later that evening, Seth opened his eyes and looked at his mother. He yawned and sat up in bed. Mama, I'm hungry, he said. Tears of joy sprang into Alina's eyes. He was going to be fine. He was hungry. Thank God. And thank Harley. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Harley dropped his head in his hands and rubbed his eyes. He sat on the top rail of the fence and thought about the events that had occurred of late. He couldn't stop seeing the picture of Seth being carried away by the river and Alina's horrified expression. He kept hearing her screams, seeing her ready to throw herself in the water even though she couldn't swim. Darn, she needed a keeper and so did those kids. What if he hadn't been there? They might have both drowned. And then what would have happened to Amber? It was too terrifying to contemplate. Alina needed a man who loved her, who loved those children. He didn't think he was capable of giving love, and he was certain he didn't deserve to be loved in return. She needed a man who would always put them first, not a selfish cuss who drank too much and loved to chase skirts. But right now, he was her only option. She didn't have another choice. He might not be able to give her exactly what she wanted, but he could at least provide for her. Wouldn't that be better than nothing? Maybe. And he did think she was beautiful. In fact, he thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. That silky hair, those big blue eyes. Marrying her would be even more unfair, though. He would be taking advantage of her, lying with her when he couldn't offer her love in return. But she was here because he'd sent for her. She was a stranger in a strange land, and he was responsible for that. What else could she do if he didn't man up and marry her? Time was up. He needed to do something, now. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It had been nearly a week since Seth's accident, and Alina hadn't even seen Harley. He'd been out with the cattle and mending fences the last few days, leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. He'd even camped out a few nights. Was he avoiding her again? She couldn't help but think he was. Alina swept the kitchen floor with more fury than she realized. What was wrong with the man? Didn't he know she was in love with him? That thought made her freeze in position. She loved Harley Cohen. Now what was going to happen? Obviously, he didn't reciprocate her feelings. He hadn't even mentioned marrying her, or a wedding, or setting a date. How long did he expect her to stay on just waiting for him to make a move? She couldn't tolerate this much longer, even if she did love the crazy man. As though her thoughts had conjured him up, Harley appeared at the back door. He strode into the kitchen and put his hands on his hips, just staring at her. "What do you need, Harley?" she asked him in a cool tone. "I need you to get ready and ride into town with me. I've got to get some supplies, and I thought you'd like to go along. Get away from the ranch for a little while." Her mouth dropped open. He'd ignored her for a week and now he wanted her to go into town with him? Well, she guessed she shouldn't be surprised. If he was anything, Harley was unpredictable. "Okay. Just let me gather up the kids. Ma volunteered to watch them while we're gone. They'll be fine." Again, she was surprised. He actually wanted to be alone with her. "I'll change clothes and be right down." She might as well go along with him and see what he was up to. He didn't give anything away on the ride into town. He talked about the weather, the horses, and the cattle. Nothing personal. When the buckboard rolled into Pine Ridge, he pulled up in front of the general merchandise store and helped her down. Her hands were pressed against his chest momentarily and she felt her breath catch in her throat. He was such a magnetic man, she could hardly keep from throwing herself into his arms right there in the middle of the street. Until she noticed a pretty redhead walking by. The woman called out to Harley, greeting him by name. "Hey, Harley, where have you been? I haven't seen you in weeks." "Been busy, Penny." Penny ran her gaze over Alina. "I see that, cowboy. Well, come in and see me sometime soon, okay?" She winked and paraded on down the street, her hips sashaying beneath her lavender skirts. Alina stared after her, but Harley ignored the situation. "Look, Alina, I've got to go to the feed store. In the meantime, I want you to go into the store and buy the prettiest dress they have, okay? Just tell them to put it on my bill." Alina watched Penny as she crossed the street and entered the saloon. So that's where she'd invited Harley. Alina wasn't sure if it was jealousy or anger that shot through her. Normally, she wouldn't feel right about a man not her husband buying her a dress, but right now, she figured Harley deserved a bit of payback. The store was full of all kinds of goods ranging from cookware, flour and pickles, men's cowboy boots, and ready-made dresses. The shelves were lined with everything from containers of nails to hammers to pound them with. Jars of stick candy stood on the counter and bolts of cloth lined a table. Alina moved hesitantly toward the dresses. Maybe she should just buy some fabric instead. It would be cheaper. But no. Harley had told her to get a dress, so that was just what she would do. She eyed the selection, considering a plain blue one. Then her eye was caught by a very special dress. It was the loveliest she had ever seen. Alina ran her hand over the pale pink soft as silk cloth. Pink rosebuds were embroidered across the dress and white lace edged the puffed sleeves. It was beautiful. Should she? She wanted the dress badly, hungered for it. She peeked at the price tag and blanched. It was definitely expensive. She'd never owned a piece of clothing that cost that much. But Harley had told her to get the prettiest one they had, and this was definitely it. She turned to the man behind the counter and asked if there was someplace she could try it on, and he pointed to a curtain at the back of the store. "Right in there, ma'am. That sure is a pretty one." Alina hurried to the back and changed clothes. The dress fit her perfectly. She felt like a princess in the gown, and she quickly made up her mind. She was getting it. She stood at the counter while the man wrapped it up and even had him add a couple of peppermint sticks for the kids to her purchase. She had just picked up the brown paper package and turned to leave when she ran smack into a big cowboy with red hair and a beard. His eyes traveled over her hungrily. She tried to step around him, but he blocked her path. "What's your hurry, pretty lady? I haven't seen you around here before." When he spoke, She could see both of his front teeth were missing, and she smelled the distinctive odor of alcohol coming from him. Please. I have to go. Alina moved again to go around him, but he grabbed her elbow and pulled her to him. Not yet, darlin'. I just met you. Fear pumped through her veins, but so did anger. She pulled back her arm and slapped him hard across the face. Why, you little hussy, he hollered and drew his fist back to hit her. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Red. An angry voice stopped his motion, and Alina saw Harley in the doorway. She pulled away from the stranger and ran over to Harley's side. That's my fiancé you were about to smack. If you did that, I'd have to kill you. Red's face contorted into a disgusted mask. Okay, Harley, okay. I was just funning. I don't like your kind of funning. Stay away from her, you hear me? Sure, Harley, sure. He tipped his hat to Alina and mumbled an apology before slipping out the door behind Harley. Are you all right, Alina? Harley put his finger under her chin and tipped her face up to look into her eyes. Did he hurt you? No, Harley, I'm fine. Thank you for coming when you did, though. Well, come on, then. Let's go home. Chapter 9. Harley didn't speak again until the wagon had rolled out of town. He held the reins loosely but still felt anger burning in his gut. He had seen Red when he saw Red with his hands on Alina. Just more proof that she needed protecting, and he knew there was only one way he could do that. Alina, that dress you bought. I hope you'll wear it at our wedding. He glanced over at her to gauge her reaction to his words. I talked to the minister, and he's willing to marry us a week from Sunday. Do you mean it, Harley? She spoke in a serious tone, her eyes on him. I do. I can't promise you the world, but I will promise to always take care of you, to take care of the kids. Frank says I have to get married, and you need a man to protect you. It would be a marriage of convenience for both of us. I see, she said softly. It wasn't the most romantic of proposals, he knew that, but it was the best he could do for now. Will you marry me, Alina? For the children's sake, if nothing else. She hesitated, a small frown pulling the corners of her lips downward. She didn't say anything for a long while, the silence taut between them. A small sigh shuddered through her. She'd made her decision. Yes, Harley, I will marry you. He couldn't squash the joy he felt rising inside of him. This beautiful, kind woman had consented to be his bride. He didn't deserve her, but somehow she was his. I'm glad, Alina. I really am. When they got back to the ranch, they found Frank and Maria in the kitchen, the children seated at the table eating fresh-baked cookies. Seth looked up and grinned at them, and Amber immediately started to whine and reach for her mother. Alina picked her up and gave her a smacking kiss on her forehead, and the little girl laughed. Folks, we've got an announcement. You are both invited to our wedding, which will take place in a week from Sunday. Maria threw her hands over her mouth and hurried over to give Alina and Amber a hug. Frank held out his hand to Harley and they shook, Frank squeezing his nephew's shoulder. We'll be there with bells on, son. Then he turned to Alina. Congratulations, Alina. Congratulations. That's the best news I've had in months. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Maria. She spoke breathlessly, tears springing up in her eyes. Excuse me. She couldn't stand there and look at their happy faces anymore. Choking back a sob, she turned and ran from the room. Well, I guess she's just overcome with happiness, Frank said. Yeah, I guess so, Harley agreed. He didn't really think that was the problem, though. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Alina wearily unclipped the last shirt from the clothesline. She was tired to the point of exhaustion. Amber had a cold and hadn't been sleeping well for the last couple nights, and Alina had been tending to her non-stop. Thank goodness she was napping right now so Alina could get some work done. Of course, Seth was in high gear and ran around shooting imaginary bad guys, his bang-bangs pounding through her head. She toted the laundry basket into the house just in time to hear Amber start to cry. She hurried up the stairs and collected her daughter, bringing her down to the main room and settling her with her doll. The little girl still wasn't happy, though, and threw the doll to the floor, winding up her vocal cords to full tilt. "Oh, Amber, Amber, what am I going to do with you? Mama needs to mop the kitchen floor and get your brother cleaned up. Won't you please be good for me?" Alina felt like crying herself. Not only were the kids being awful, but her nerves were frayed over the upcoming wedding. She was going to marry a man who didn't love her. Her life was falling apart, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Amber threw herself back on the sofa and started to kick her feet, crying and screaming at the same time. Her little face was red, her sweat-dampened curls clinging to her cheeks. Seth ran up and poked her in the belly. "Shut up, Amber. You make too much noise." Amber paused in her fit long enough to punch his nose, and that started Seth wailing. "Come on, you two. You're driving me crazy. I will be so glad when Frank and Maria get back from town and can help me take care of you." "Will I do?" Alina turned around and saw Harley standing in the doorway, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I don't know what you can do," she replied. "I can at least take Seth off your hands for a little while." "Hey, cowboy, want to go for a ride?" Seth's tears dried instantly, and he let out a cheer. "I sure do." "Well, come on then. Let's leave the womenfolk alone for a while." Seth scrambled out the door, and Harley followed him while Alina stared after them in amazement. This was the first time Harley had ever offered to help her with the children. Maybe marriage to him wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe. But she didn't feel very certain of it, not at all. Asterisk. Seth sat in front of Harley atop the big, black horse, happily talking away a mile a minute. The little boy was full of questions. "Why do the cows eat grass, Harley? Why don't they eat regular food like we do?" "Because they're not humans, son. They're cattle, and cattle like grass." "Well, why is their milk white and not green then?" Harley was amazed by the way this little boy's mind worked. "I don't really know, Seth. That's just the way God wants it, I guess." "Does God want us to eat the cows then?" Yes, he does. It's called the food cycle. We provide them grass, and they provide us with meat." "Oh. Okay." He was quiet for a few minutes and Harley assumed he was thinking about what he had just told him. But no. His mind had gone on to a new subject. "Harley, are you really going to marry my mama?" "I guess I am, come this Sunday." "Will you be my papa then?" "I sure will." "I'm glad. I hope you won't go away and leave us like my other papa did. He got sick and died." Seth was solemn as he told Harley that. Mama said he didn't want to go away, but God needed him in heaven, so he had to go. Harley felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Seth was a great kid who had lost his father. He reminded him so much of himself when he was a child. He had lost his father, too, and he always felt different than the other children. They all had good fathers who loved them, fathers who had created them. Not just a substitute dad, like he would be. The way Frank had been for him. Darn Frank. This whole mess was his fault. If he hadn't insisted that Harley marry and do it quickly, Alina would have been free to marry a man of her own choosing, one who truly loved her and the kids, not some bum like him. He wasn't good enough for them and didn't deserve their love. He had too much of his father in him. He was no good. "Okay, Seth, I guess we better head back. It'll be supper time before you know it." "Okay, Papa. I'm hungry." Harley listened to the little boy chatter all the way back to the ranch, his little body rocking against his own. He felt bad, really bad. He knew he couldn't go through with this wedding. It just wasn't fair to Alina or the kids. Now, he just had to find the courage to tell her. Asterisk. Alina was snapping peas on the front porch when Harley and Seth came riding back in. Her eyes watched them and her heart swelled. Seth looked so happy as he sat in front of Harley, his feet kicking merrily. Harley's strong arms surrounded her son, and she couldn't help but admire his handsome face. Just think, this man was going to be her husband in a few days. Harley climbed off the horse and turned and lifted Seth to the ground. Seth flew up the porch stairs and stopped in front of her. "Mama, we had so much fun. And guess what? Harley's going to my papa. He said so." "That's wonderful, Seth. Now, why don't you run in and wash that dirty face and get ready for supper? It'll be ready soon." "Okay, Ma." His little legs began churning again as he took off into the house. She had to chuckle. Seth never walked if he could run. "Howdy, Alina. Where's Amber?" Harley came onto the porch at a much slower pace than Seth and dropped into the chair beside hers. She finally fell back to sleep. "I'll be so glad when she gets over this cold and feels better. Alina, can I have a word with you?" She looked at him and saw a serious expression on his face. Uh-oh. She wasn't going to like what he had to say. "What is it, Harley? Did Seth give you a bad time?" "No, not at all. He's a great kid." "Oh, good. What is it then?" Her hands paused as she snapped a pea pod and looked at him expectantly. "I don't know how to say this, Alina, but I guess the best way is to just spit it out." He hesitated a moment longer, then looked into her beautiful face. He hated to hurt her, but it was for the best. For her and the kids. "Alina, I'm sorry, but I can't marry you. You deserve better, and so do those kids. You deserve someone who truly loves you and is a good man. Not a no-good bounder like me." Her heart dropped at his words, and she stared at him open-mouthed. "Not marry her? Really? I know I've screwed things up, Alina. I should have never asked you to marry me in the first place. I'm not worthy of you. I'm just like my dad. Just ask Frank, he'll tell you that, too." Alina rose, the basket of peas falling to the floor. The color had drained from her cheeks and she was shaking. Anger blazed from her blue eyes as she stared at him. "Darn you, Harley Cohen. Darn you." Alina couldn't believe those cuss words had come from her mouth, but she had never been so hurt, so angry, in her life. "I love you, you rotten person. Why, I don't know now, but I do. I'll be out of here and out of your hair in an hour." She turned and banged her way through the screen door, tears coursing down her cheeks. Dear God in heaven, what was she to do now? She had already packed their clothes and gone downstairs to retrieve the kids' toys when Frank and Maria returned home. She looked at them with tear-filled eyes as she hugged Amber's rag doll to her breast. "Alina, what's wrong, dear? Harley, get in here. Why is Alina crying?" Harley strode into the room from the porch and looked at them. "Because I called off the wedding." "You what?" Frank bellowed. "You called off the wedding? Have you lost your senses?" "No, I've come to Uncle Frank. I can't go through with it and ruin her life or those kids' lives." "Well, you are a fool, boy. A fool." He spat the words out, then grimaced and grabbed his chest. He let out a pain-filled moan and closed his eyes, collapsing in a pile on the floor. "Frank. Frank." Maria dropped to her knees beside him. "Frank, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. He was unconscious. "Harley, ride for the doctor. Ride as fast as you can." Maria cradled Frank's head on her lap. "Don't waste time. Just go." Harley stood for a minute longer staring at his uncle. His uncle's face had lost all its color, and he suddenly looked small lying there. It took a moment before Harley could get his body to respond, then he turned and ran as fast as he could. Chapter 10. Between the two of them, Alina and Maria managed to get Frank to his bed, and now they stood and watched as the doctor tended to him. Maria's clenched fist was pressed against her mouth when he finally turned to them with a grave expression. "He's had a heart attack, Maria, but I think he'll survive. He'll need plenty of rest for the next few days. We'll know more then. Thank you, doctor. Thank you. I'll take good care of him. See that he takes this powder I'm leaving here and make sure he doesn't get upset about anything. It could kill him. I will. I'll do everything I can to make sure nothing upsets him. I know you will. He patted Maria on the shoulder and took his leave. Alina watched as Maria plunked down in a chair by Frank's bed and took his hand. Frank, you'll be okay, you have to be okay. Alina's heart wrenched at the sight. She had come to love this couple over the past weeks. She couldn't leave now. Maria would need her help. She couldn't go off and leave her to care for Frank and the house and garden, too. She stepped over and laid her hand on Maria's shoulder. I'll help, Maria. I'll help, don't worry. I'll take care of the house. You just worry about Frank. Maria laid her hand on top of Alina's. Thank you, Alina. I'm going to need you now. I'll be here. At least until Frank gets better. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Harley stopped his horse and took off his hat to wipe his brow. He'd been working hard the last week, taking care of the herd and all the other ranch chores since Frank's heart attack. And if he were honest with himself, he was avoiding Alina, too. He could hardly stand to look at her, she looked so tired and wan. That was his fault, and he knew it. It was easier to just not see her at all. But he wanted to. He missed her cheerful smile and her lilting voice, the way she used to sing as she did her chores. She never sang these days. At least, it appeared that Frank was getting better. He'd eaten a little bit yesterday and sat up in bed most of the afternoon. He still looked gray and shrunken, and he sure didn't have any of his old energy, but he was still with them. Harley had to admit Frank's heart attack had scared him. He might not have been getting along with his uncle lately, but he sure wasn't ready to lose him. Frank had played a huge role in his life, and Harley knew there was nobody else that could fill his place in his heart. He'd never told him, but he loved his uncle. Frank Cohen had been a rock to this family. He'd worked hard and made sure they had a place to live in comfort. What if he hadn't stepped up and provided for them when Maria got pregnant out of wedlock? There would only have been one alternative, and it wasn't a pretty one. The only way Maria could have supported them would have been in the saloon, lowering herself to strangers. The very thought made Harley sick to his stomach. No, instead Maria had taken Frank's offer to live with him on the ranch. They'd lied to everyone, told them she was a widow, and her reputation was intact. They'd had plenty to eat, a solid roof over their heads, and never had to spend a night alone and desperate like so many other women in his mother's position. All because of Frank Cohen. And Harley had never once thanked him for his sacrifices. He could have died without knowing what he meant to Harley. Guilt racked his soul. How could he have been so selfish, so insensitive? How could he live with himself if he didn't tell Frank how he felt? Instead of resenting the man, Harley should have been kissing his feet all this time. You're a dad-blamed fool, Harley Cohen, he told himself as he turned Magic back toward the ranch. He had to make sure Frank knew how grateful he was for all his care. He kicked his horse into a gallop and headed home. He needed to talk to his uncle. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Harley peeked into his uncle's bedroom and saw he was awake before entering quietly. How you doing, Uncle Frank? I'm sick and tired of lying in this bed, I'll tell you that, he groused. Your mother won't let me get up, though, so I'm stuck here. You know Mama. When she's got her mind made up, there's no changing it, so you might as well not fight it. Frank gave a weak laugh then went into a coughing spell. Harley moved closer and took his uncle's hand in his. It was thin, not like it used to be. Frank had lost weight. Why hadn't Harley noticed he wasn't well a long time ago? Because I'm a blind fool, he told himself. So wrapped up in my own mind that I couldn't take time to think about anybody else. Frank, I owe you an apology. I owe you a lot more than that. If it wasn't for you, Lord only knows what would have happened to me and Mama. To say thank you isn't nearly enough, but it's all I can give you. Frank closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to look at Harley. I've been hard on you, son. Too hard. It wasn't easy watching you struggle through life, getting drunk all the time, watching you get into scrape after scrape. I should have had more faith in ya, though. You're nothing like your father was. He never gave a thought about anybody but himself. He was a worthless bum, but you're not. You're a good man who just had a little trouble finding his way. Harley swallowed his tears. It means the world to me to hear you say that, Frank. I gave you a hard time, I know it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't seem to help myself. I promise you, things are going to be different from now on. I believe you, son. And I owe you an apology, too, you and that girl. I shouldn't have said you had to get married. I shouldn't have forced your hand that way. I was just fed up and didn't know what else to do. Once I said it, I was too proud to back down and tell ya I didn't mean it. Now, look at the mess I've caused. It's not your fault. I should have never sent for a mail-order bride. I just thought it would be an easy way to get myself out of the muddle I'd made. I didn't think about the woman's feelings or anything else. I still hope you get married, Harley, only I want you to love the woman you choose. I just hope it's somebody as sweet as Alina. I've really blown that. I think I do love her, and I love those kids, too. But it's too late now. She hates me, and I don't blame her. Maybe you can fix things up, Harley. Why don't you go talk to her, try to make her see you were wrong? You think I could win her back? You think I've got a chance? You'll never know until you try. You're right. Maybe I can convince her that I do love her and want her to be my wife. I want that more than anything. Then get on out there and give it your best shot, son. I will. I bet she's in the kitchen getting dinner ready. I'm going to do it right now. He turned and grabbed the doorknob when he heard his uncle call his name. Good luck, Harley. You can do it. Thank you, Uncle. For everything. Harley hurried out to the kitchen and found it empty. He raced into the main room but was met with only silence. He stepped out on the porch and found his mother, but she was crying. Mama, what's wrong? Harley, she's gone. She said Frank was on the mend now, and she couldn't stay any longer. She begged me to lend her enough money for train tickets for her and the kids, and I did. She deserved at least that much. Lord, I miss them already. Gone? When? How long ago? About a half hour. She took one of the wagons and said she'd leave it at the livery. Harley's heart sank. He was too late. But maybe not. Maybe he could still catch her. I'm going to bring her back, Ma. Don't worry. He hollered the words over his shoulder as he ran toward the barn. The trip into Pine Ridge had never seemed so long, even though he kept Magic galloping the entire way. He had to get there before they got on that train. Chapter 11. Alina sat on the bench and leaned her head back, closing her eyes in hopes of easing her headache. She didn't think it would work. She didn't think anything would work. She held Amber on her lap, and Seth sat beside her kicking his feet. His face was the picture of despair, and Alina felt awful for bursting his dream world. He had loved it at the ranch and didn't want to leave. She didn't want to leave, either, but she didn't have a choice. When Frank spent the afternoon sitting up yesterday, she knew it was time for them to go. Maria could take care of things by herself from now on, though Alina knew it wouldn't be easy on her. That was just one more thing she could feel guilty about. She didn't have a choice, though, did she? She couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted, and Harley had made it obvious he didn't want her. Oh, but she wanted him. Why, she didn't know. Maybe because she was a fool. No, there was no maybe about it. Only a fool would fall in love with a man who didn't love her. There was no other choice. She had to leave. She'd borrowed enough money from Maria to get them tickets as far as Denver and a room for a few days. She'd find work once she got there. Maybe as a waitress or a clerk in a store. There had to something for her. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Alina shrugged. It seemed appropriate that the sky would be crying tears as she left this little town. God knew she'd shed enough of them in the past week. But no more. She was done crying over Harley. She would make it on her own, take care of herself and her children. She had to. Alina. She heard her name coming from behind her and recognized the voice at once. Harley. What are you doing here? Did you come to say goodbye? Well, goodbye then, and good riddance. She didn't even turn her head to look at him. Alina, I came to beg you to stay. Please don't go. I love you. Well, you've got a mighty funny way of showing it, she spat at him. So, now he was lying. Guilt. That was what it was. Guilt. Go away and leave me alone. I don't ever want to see you again. Harley walked around in front of her and got down on his knees, looking at her with pleading eyes. I don't blame you for feeling that way, Alina. You probably hate me. I've been a fool. I just want the best for you and for the kids. I didn't think I could be that for you, but I've changed. I don't deserve your love, but I'm asking you to give me another chance. Please. Let me love you. Come home with me. We'll get married, and I'll be the best husband I can. I promise. Tears welled in her eyes. If only he'd said those words earlier. It was too late now. Mama, please. Let's go back. Seth took her hand and looked up at her with beseeching eyes. It nearly broke her heart. We can't, Seth. Why can't you, Alina? Nobody's forcing you to get on that train. All you have to do is say yes to me. No, her chin quivered as she said it, but she had to stick to her guns. What do you want me to do, Alina? I'll do anything. I'll shout it to the world. He rose to his feet and raised his arms. Listen up, everybody. I want you all to know I love this woman. I love her. The few people lingering at the station all stopped what they were doing and stared at them. Harley, quit. You're embarrassing me. She tugged at him and tried to get him to stop shouting, her face flaming as he continued to yell. I love you, Alina Chambers. I want you to be my wife. She stared at him and then began to laugh. He was a fool, just like he claimed. But it was odd. She believed him. He did love her. Otherwise, he wouldn't be shouting like a maniac and making a clod of himself. Tears started falling from her eyes, but these tears were different. They were tears of joy. I love you, too, Harley Cohen, you crazy man. I really do. Will you marry me? I will. I will, I will, I will. Harley pulled her to her feet and wrapped her and Amber both in his arms, reaching out to pull Seth into the hug as well. Harley's lips kissed her over and over again as a cheer went up throughout the crowd. Alina's heart swelled, and she finally knew she had come home. Chapter 12. 1 week later, Alina got dressed in the pretty pink dress and turned to give Maria a hug. I'm so happy, Alina, the older woman whispered in her ear. Not only do I have the daughter I always wanted, but I have 2 beautiful grandchildren as well. And I have the mother I always wanted. Maria squeezed her tightly, then took Seth and Amber each by a hand. It's time, child. Let's get you married. Yeah, let's go get my new papa, Seth crowed. They went down the stairs and Alina took hold of the bouquet of daisies Maria had fashioned for her. Frank came forward and took her arm and led her toward where Harley waited. He looked at her with pride and love burning in his eyes. When the ceremony was over, he kissed her fervently and she thought her heart would burst with joy. He picked up Amber and she happily kissed him on the cheek, Seth standing proudly by his side. At long last, they were a family now and nothing would ever change that. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.